The RTX 3060 Ti was an extremely popular card when it launched. So popular in fact that it's still sitting in 7th place in the Steam hardware survey. But as of late, with the new GPU launches, it doesn't seem like there's anywhere to really go if you're looking for some kind of an upgrade path. The newer, lower end cards from both AMD and NVIDIA seem lackluster at their respective price points, but with the $299 price tag of the RTX 4060 with its newer architecture, is it really as bad as was first made out? Should you stick with the older 3060 Ti, or should you actually upgrade to the newest GPU on the market from Team Green? Well, that's what we're going to find out, but before we do, here's a quick word from this video's sponsor. Hello mate, you alright? Yeah, just got all the bits for my banging new gaming PC. Just got to put it together. It's going to be so much better than yours. Oh, right. What did you get then? The latest Intel 12th gen processor, a feature-packed motherboard, and 32GB of DDR4 memory. See? Miles ahead of yours. You realise that board needs DDR5 memory, don't you? Don't tell me you went and bought the wrong stuff. DDR4 is so 2014. I can't believe you was that stupid. What? No, you're joking. What should I get then? For me, I'd be looking at Corsair's newest Vengeance DDR5 kits, or if you're wanting that all-important RGB, then go for the Dominator Platinum RGB. Oh, you are a lifesaver, thanks, but where can I find out more? By clicking the link in the description below, of course. And you call me the stupid one. So the biggest gripe on the RTX 4060 came down to the 8GB of VRAM and the all-important price. Consumers argued that for $299, we should be getting more than 8GB in the ever-demanding world of the latest games. Sure, don't get me wrong, when we initially looked at the RTX 4060, it didn't seem all that bad. But after running tests on games that we normally don't benchmark, it was pretty clear that 8GB of VRAM on a 128-bit memory bus creates some issues. Now the funny thing is that when the 3060 Ti launched, it was set with an MSRP of $399 and comes with 8GB of VRAM. Admittedly, being on a wider 256-bit bus and with 65% more memory bandwidth, but at the time there was no uproar. No one was complaining about VRAM or the lack thereof. So what happened? Well, time went on. Games were made in such a way to harness the larger amounts of VRAM, and while it was acceptable back in the tail end of 2020 when the RTX 3060 Ti actually launched, it's not going to cut it in 2023. Though it does actually go even deeper than that, because when you look at the 4060 Ti 8GB and 16GB, it's clear to see that not everything is about VRAM and, well, there's more to it than first meets the eye, which is what makes this matchup even more interesting. We have two GPUs that are aimed at around the same segment of 1080p gaming with a light amount of dabbling into 1440p. And while the 3060 Ti has got the beefier specs, not just in terms of memory, the 4060 is the newer of the two cards. So maybe it will be a lot closer than first thought. Also, what's worth taking into account is that while the RTX 4060 is still at its MSRP of $299, the 3060 Ti is still selling on Newegg, brand new, for $320, meaning that it's actually $7 more expensive. But in a bit of a flip, you can buy it used for an average selling price of $239, which puts it around 20% cheaper. So the big question is, which one is better? Especially considering the price, and that's what we're going to see today. To test, we threw both cards onto our usual benchmarking system with an Intel Core i9 12900K and 32GB of Patriot Viper 6200MHz dual-channel DDR5 memory, all slotted nicely into an Asus Maximus Z690 Hero motherboard. All of our testing was done on Windows 11 and we tested a total of 19 games, including some ray tracing results to show how that's improved, or not, from each generation. And we'll be taking a look at 10 individual titles today, before looking at the overall averages for all of the games that we tested. Also, due to the nature of these cards, we'll be focusing on 1080p and 1440p today, as 4K is, well, pretty much out of the question for this tier of GPU. So, with that out of the way, let's jump into those glorious benchmarks. Starting things off with the Plague Tale Requiem, where the 4060 is off to a fairly good start, with the RTX 3060 Ti slipping behind by 10% at 1080p, while at 1440p, the 3060 Ti falls even further behind by a larger 15% margin. Sadly, that lead is destroyed as we move on to Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 on the Ultra preset, where we now see the 3060 Ti sitting ahead by 8% at 1080p and a larger 14% faster at 1440p. The extra bandwidth for the memory on the 3060 Ti is definitely making a difference at 1440p, of which the newer 4060 just isn't able to keep up. As we move on to control on the high preset at 1080p, the 3060 Ti comes in a very healthy 21% faster, while 1440p sees that increase quite dramatically, with the older GPU now commanding a 29% lead over the newer Ada Lovelace-based GPU. Enabling ray tracing doesn't help either. In fact, the 3060 Ti now comes in 28% faster at 1080p and the same at 1440p, leading to the RTX 4060 dropping below 40 FPS and becoming, well, quite unplayable. In fact, the only true playable scenario is with the 3060 Ti at 1080p, where it came in with 72 frames per second in the averages. Cyberpunk 2077 on the Ultra preset saw a smaller gain, with the 3060 Ti coming in 7% faster at 1080p, while again that lead grew quite drastically at 1440p, now seeing the older GPU sporting a 21% lead over the RTX 4060. Enabling ray tracing saw both cards take a big hit in performance, though the 3060 Ti still comes out on top with 14% more performance at 1080p and 15% more at 1440p. Again, the only card that I'd even consider using for ray tracing out of the two would be the 3060 Ti at 1080p, but even then I'd be inclined to dial in the settings a little in the hope of boosting extra performance. Doom Eternal showed impressive performance on both cards at both resolutions, but again, the 3060 Ti comes out the stronger performing card, with just a small 4% lead at 1080p and a larger 18% lead at 1440p. Taking into consideration the price of the two cards, you could argue that the 3060 Ti wins if you're looking at buying used, but the 4060 is the better card if solely looking at buying new retail versions of both cards. And that's something we'll discuss when we look at the cost per frame element. In Dying Light 2 on the high setting, and we actually start to see the RTX 4060 fight back a little bit, now with the 3060 Ti coming in a small but modest 3% slower. Though again, it's quite short-lived as we bump up the resolution, which favours the 3060 Ti now coming in 7% faster at 1440p. Moving on to Hogwarts Legacy on the Ultra preset, and this is a game that many complained about in regards to the 4060 series. And it's easy to see why, as the 3060 Ti pumps out 19% more performance at 1080p and a staggering 38% more at 1440p. That throttled memory interface really is a stickler at the slightly larger resolution, and while NVIDIA will claim it's a 1080p card, that's not really much of an excuse here. Next up is Spider-Man Remastered, and here again there's nothing to grumble about in terms of performance. They both come in with respectable and playable performance, though again the 3060 Ti is just the better card, coming in 11% faster at 1080p on the very high preset, while it further cements that lead at 1440p with 24% more frames overall, putting it just over 100 frames per second. As we enable ray tracing, the lead actually increases, now with the 3060 Ti coming in 13% faster. But in a turn up for the books, the 3060 Ti at 1440p now comes in 1% slower than the newer RTX 4060, though at such a minuscule difference it could be chalked up as margin of error. In one of the most demanding games that we test, Microsoft Flight Sim saw very small differences of just 7% in favour of the 3060 Ti at 1080p, while 1440p saw the older GPU come in 3% slower when compared to the RTX 4060. No matter what GPU you're using to play this game, you're going to need a strong performing CPU, and with the likes of DLSS 3 being part of the RTX 4060's arsenal, you could say that this is a win for the newer GPU, depending on how you look at it. Then lastly, in Watch Dogs Legion, again the 3060 Ti comes out the stronger of the two, with 10% more performance over the newer 40 series card, and then as we move up to 1440p, that lead increases once again, now with a 17% lead in favour of the Ampere based graphics card. Then, finally, enabling ray tracing sees the gap widen at 1080p, now with the 3060 Ti coming in 15% faster, and then the same 15% lead at 1440p as well, though again at sub 40 FPS. I wouldn't really be looking to play with ray tracing on either of the cards personally at that respective frame rate. So a pretty dire situation for the RTX 4060, though as I mentioned, it depends on how you look at it based on the price of the 3060 Ti, which can be had for cheaper if you don't mind buying used, but due to stock dwindling, it could actually work out more expensive overall. Now, while we looked at 10 games there, including some ray tracing examples thrown in, when we look at all of the games we tested, we can get a bit of a clearer picture as to how things look overall. It's here at 1080p where pretty much every game garners more performance from the 3060 Ti, with the exception of Dying Light 2 and A Plague Tale Requiem, though Dying Light 2 was by quite a small margin of 3%, so could be deemed as margin of error anyway. Collectively, this means that the 3060 Ti comes out around 11% faster on average at 1080p, and really that's brought down quite a bit by a single game, being A Plague Tale Requiem, while most of the other games tested showed a 10% or higher difference in favour of the older card, which isn't exactly great for NVIDIA and I guess those wanting to upgrade to something newer. Now sadly, it goes from bad to worse as we move up to 1440p, where that really subpar memory system shows the chinks in its armour, as the 3060 Ti, the older card, comes in on average 16% faster, with the biggest lead going to Hogwarts Legacy, but with some sizable numbers in some top titles too. Again, A Plague Tale Requiem goes in favour of the 4060, but basing buying a new GPU off one game that you likely won't play forever isn't exactly the best way to do things, and looking at a whole suite of games gives a much clearer picture as to how things look across a multitude of the latest and most popular games. When looking at the cost per frame, again, the 3060 Ti, even at its slightly inflated retail price of $319, it ends up coming in cheaper, albeit by 2%, but 2% is still a pretty astronomical number when taking into consideration the generational uplift of the RTX 4060, or in this case, the fact that it's, well, frankly so terrible. Also factoring in the point that you can pick up an RTX 3060 Ti for $239 on the used markets, this shows that the 4060 is kind of seen in an even worse light, especially as the Ampere-based GPU comes in a whopping 27% cheaper per frame at 1080p and outperforms the new Ada Lovelace-based GPU as well. Now, as we move up to 1440p, it again gets even worse for the newer GPU, as the older 3060 Ti with its $320 brand new retail price manages to come in 10% cheaper per frame compared to the RTX 4060. And then again, when looking at used prices, which obviously may put some people off, but those who aren't bothered will be getting a saving per frame of 33%, further kind of highlighting the really poor decision with the memory bus and bandwidth on the Ada GPU, as it just really seems to struggle at 1440p, and I fear that's only going to get worse as newer games come out that need to not only be able to harness more VRAM, but at a quicker rate. Which is why the big argument about the 4060 and 4060 Ti isn't just constrained to the amount of VRAM, as that's clear to see from the 4060 Ti that NVIDIA nor AIBs wanted to sample. Of course, I'm talking about the 16 gig model. Now, using the analogy I've used before of having tons of power in a car but leaving the handbrake on, I think that's the easiest way to understand what's going on. Throwing more VRAM at the problem isn't going to fix it. It's more down to how quickly it can access it with the 40 series cards. It's simply, well, being throttled through the narrow bus and the lack of speed. So there we have it. I hope this has shown kind of truly how bad the generational move from the 30 series is to the newer 4060. And if you've already, I don't know, got one of these cards, if you're already rocking a 3060 Ti, there just isn't enough of a reason to make the jump. Sure, you get DLSS and better efficiency, but it suffers in more important areas that gamers actually want and need from their GPU. Pure rasterization and even ray tracing to a degree. And maybe that's where NVIDIA have got it wrong. I get that they are putting in a huge focus on DLSS, especially with frame generation, and don't get me wrong, I'm an advocate of it, especially in titles like Microsoft Flight Sim, where it really does make a huge difference. But we've casted polls on Twitter and YouTube before, and based on the feedback there, that's not what you guys want. It's not what gamers want. Instead, they want a big enough reason to jump from one generation to the next. And right now, that just doesn't exist, at least on the low end. And the only way that's really going to change is, well, if this gets a pretty dramatic and sizable price cut. And that about wraps this one up. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, a like and a sub to the channel would be amazing. And if you love what we do, then look at joining our super special Patreon club, where you'll get access to a ton of cool goodies, including monthly live streams, bi-weekly game nights, exclusive behind the scenes content, including pictures and videos, and it also helps to support us to continue bringing you great content like this. The link is, as always, down below. Also, be sure to check out our Discord if you want to play games and talk tech in the kind of least toxic server on the internet. Don't just take my word for it. The link for that is also down below. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys.